Welcome to another edition of Urban Talks. Welcome to Center for Architecture and Metropolitan Planning in Prague. My name is Jiří and I will be here with you. We will spend 1 hour with our amazing guest, Charles Renfro, a New York-based architect who is part of Dillers Cofidio plus Renfro from 1997 and his partner from 2004. Hi, Charles.
Hey, how are you?
Great. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm really happy that you decided to be part of Urban Talks, our series about architects and foreign studios that present their work here in camp. As usually, you will have a chance to ask us a question on slido.com. I will have them here on my tablet, and I will ask Mr. Renfro about them. You probably know some work of this New York-based studio. I can mention The Shed, recently completed Tianjin Juilliard School in China, or Zaryave Park in Moscow. But the most notable known is Highline Park in West Manhattan, which is the former railroad changed, redesigned into a linear park. And as you know, Prague has some vision about changing our former railroad in park, something like Highline. But Highline was the first one, the most important one, because it's inspiration for whole world. And we will hear about that also tonight. So, Mr. Renfro, welcome again. And I think it's time for your lecture. So I will ask you for it. We're looking forward to see your projects.
Great. Really great to be there with you in Prague, one of my favorite cities in Europe. I actually happened to be in the neighborhood just last week, exploring work in the neighborhood. So we're very, very familiar with Central Europe and love being there, both as tourists, but also as professionals. Just a little introduction to DSNR. The name of the talk tonight is called Performance Parks, and you'll understand why those two distinctions in a moment. But just a bit about what we do. We're a firm that started in the realm of art, installation art, public art, and performance, actually, often paid for by my partner's credit cards before I joined the firm. And to this day, we continue to work in these territories. And we find them essential to helping us come up with ideas that drive some of our more known architectural work, such as the Broad Museum in Los Angeles, the now probably not going to happen Center for Music in London, the US Olympic and Paralympic Museum, and the Museum of Modern Art Extension. It's our work in those fields of public work and public space that led us to a very deep understanding of the needs of clients, particularly in the arts. We continue to work with higher education universities such as Columbia, Brown, Stanford, and the Juilliard School on their new facilities. We find those kinds of projects really exhilarating because we're able to match a pedagogy with an idea, an architectural idea, and the buildings are tools with which the institutions can teach their pedagogy better. And then one of the areas I'm going to focus on tonight is work that we've been doing in the performing arts. Again, the Center for Music, and the College of the Holy Cross, the Pryor Center for Performing Arts, which is almost complete, Tianjin Juilliard School, which I'll spend more time on, and of course the renovation and additions to Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts. I'm not going to spend much time on that. I'm hoping you all have seen that if you've been to New York and know that space intimately. And then the last area that we put a lot of energy into is the making of public space. And public space to us can take the form of parks, but it also can take the form of outdoor parts of buildings that then have an aspect of performance and culture built into their surfaces. And those include Lincoln Center, the High Line, of course, I'll speak about, the Tide in London and Greenwich Peninsula, and Zaria Idea Park. I'll spend some time on that tonight. And I think I just always like to start with this project called Blur, which we executed in 2002 on Lake Neuchâtel in Switzerland. This was won through a competitive process and was intended to be a media pavilion as part of Swiss Expo 2002. Instead of making a media pavilion, which is about technology and pixels per inch, what we wanted to do was, in fact, make this pavilion be about its site, the site itself. And we used the site as the material to make this piece of architecture by pumping the lake water through 33,000 high-pressure fog nozzles. And the cumulative effect of that action made a cloud. This cloud is a piece of architecture that you can enter, but it has no walls, it has no weight. It completely changes shape and impression over time. You can traverse the way through the cloud to the top deck of the cloud, which is called the Angel Bar, where there's nothing served but water. It's this merger of architecture and experience that I think most typifies the work that we do, whether it's making a building for a cultural institution or making a drinking glass as an art project. We're very interested in the way to engage the public in more meaningful ways, with more openness and more inclusivity than clients had previously thought possible. So with each project that we start, we try to question the role of the public in the project and try to expand the public's access to the project. When you got to the top of the Blur building, there was nothing to see and nothing to do. You were forced into dependence on other senses other than vision, than your sense of seeing. And that idea of challenging vision as the mother sense has been with us throughout our career and continues to be a driving force in much of the permanent architectural work that we do. So I'm going to start with a High Line, a project that most people know, at least from reputation and image. And I want to talk about how we did what we did. The line was an abandoned rail line on the west side of Manhattan, 1.5 miles long. It was really only active for about 30 years. It was made just before World War II and became obviated after World War II as soon as the interstate highway system in the States was able to do the things it did, which is deliver food products to Manhattan. This was taken over by trucks. And therefore, it became an abandoned industrial relic, a ruin, if you will, a modern day ruin. And there were two sides to the argument about whether or not to save this ruin. One side said, this is a beautiful found public space where seeds had germinated and made a beautiful parkland free of any human intervention other than making the foundation itself. And then there were others that said, it's an eyesore. It blocks the chance for development, the west side of Manhattan. And there was a really healthy debate between whether to keep the High Line and turn it into a public park or to take it down. And you can see this question posited by one of the local newspapers, which suggested to take the track down. Well, we're very happy that that didn't happen. And just a little bit of a video will show how the park had become its own public place, although the public was not allowed to be there. Seeds that had fallen off of the trains or blown in from neighboring green spaces in New York City would take root in nothing more than air on the line. There was no planting soil there. But because it proved itself as a natural ecology, when we were asked to join the competition to design the High Line as a permanent public space, we wanted to make sure that we took in the different kinds of ecologies that were there, not just the plant life and the ecological systems of nature that had taken root, but also the social life of the city. The line passed through the meatpacking district, which was a long kind of industrialized part of New York City that had been taken over by a bunch of different factions of the community, including the gay leather crowd and other folks. So like the line itself, the neighborhoods were actually attracting this kind of admix of different kinds of people and different kinds of architectures. Our first thought was to keep the ruin intact. And we did that by imagining a new paving surface that would allow the green to inhabit the gray of the concrete in very informal ways. And it would come through these cracks and allow people really intimate contact with the green stuff of the park as they walk through the park. By developing that paving system with tapered edges, we not only let the green grow through the cracks, but we also let the people meander in unscripted ways down the line, even at times bifurcating into narrow, intimate paths that put people on the edge of the line so that they could witness the city in different ways. We also worked with Pete Udolph and Field Operations, our partners, to make sure that the planting that we put on the park was ecologically sound and could work in New York City. By surveying all of the plants that had grown there naturally while it was a ruin and bringing 80% of those plants back as the primary planting specimens on the line, we were guaranteed a site that would grow all year round. And we also wanted to make sure that this was a park that catered to the people that had been in the neighborhood before, and a lot of whom were not there to use a park in a leisure way or a recreational way, but rather to inhabit the city in a more interesting, edgy way. And some images of the park right after it was built show how these planks maneuver across the width of the park, and how the green was allowed to take over the park in many places, making it feel wild and not manicured. There were parts of the park that we elevated the walkway up into the boughs of the trees, allowing visitors to be part of the landscape and to allow the landscape to grow underneath these elevated walkways. A more recent photograph in one of the stretches of the line show how the plants have taken root and grow in a very robust fashion. There are times on the line where the entire city is eclipsed by growth that we've planted there. We also wanted to make sure that the line had a relationship with the city that was reciprocal. When you're on the line, you see the city in a different way, but the city can also see you in a different way. And in a couple of places, especially at the 10th Avenue overlook, we took advantage of extra deep structure and cut a big picture window in the extra deep structure and placed a grandstand, handicap accessible grandstand, all the way down to that picture window. And so doing, framing a new view of the city and making a new stage on which people could perform in an unscripted way. It was also a way to frame the views back into the line. And so visitors to the line inadvertently become performers in a play about the city that is unscripted and constantly changing. This 10th Avenue overlook provides a picture window to absolutely nothing but traffic. And yet people are mesmerized simply to witness the quotidian activities of the city around them. The High Line, of course, made a lot of attention for debunking the idea that it should have been torn down. And in fact, quite the opposite happened, where the High Line sponsored billions and billions of dollars of of investment in the west side of Chelsea. It's become an icon, featured in comic books and featured in perfume and even some pot products. And most interestingly, the conversion of the High Line has been a model for the conversion of many rails to trails parks throughout the world. These are just a few of them, and I'm not even sure if Prague is on here, but we know that there is a similar condition in Prague. We've been following that with interest. One thing to be said is the design of the High Line is not a one-size-fits-all solution. We took our clues about the High Line directly from the surrounding district. We wanted to make sure that the line itself was responding to the local conditions in New York City. That kind of design will not always work in every condition around the world. So each of these lines must be done with care and specificity towards its environment. But like all of our projects, we're interested in how people use them, the experience that our projects give to people or allow people to make on their own. Immediately after the High Line opened, people started putting on shows, whether on their balcony, serenading the group of visitors nightly at 9 p.m., or actually in some of the surrounding buildings, such as the Standard Hotel, which spans the line. And early on in its existence, it was rumored that the owner of the hotel challenged guests and staff to engage and interact with with visitors on the High Line in various ways. And we loved that the line started taking on its own character and identity, and that people started using the line in a way that they wanted to. We were so excited by these kinds of accidental conditions that we based our show Mile Long Opera on the realized relationships that were happening all around the High Line, including from inside the Standard Hotel. We wrote an opera for 1,000 voices that would be stretched along the entire length of the High Line, so 1.5 miles along the length of the High Line. These voices were comprised of professionals and amateurs, youth choirs, church choirs, individual soloists, all collected together, singing a score that could all be heard at one time, although using lyrics that were made around the idea of the post-industrial city, in particular, post-industrial New York City. Unlike a traditional presentation of an opera where the audience is stationary and the performers are framed on a stage and come and go, here we invert that idea. The audience is in movement and can take the opera on at their own speed, and can encounter each and every one of the 1,000 singers face to face, hearing the music coming from them directly in a very, very intimate fashion. We have hopes to restage the High Line of the Mile Long Opera, both here in New York, but also in other cities, and we're working on that. In each case, the opera would be retooled to reflect the location where it's being presented. This is, again, not a kind of a piece that can just be traveled around and have it be the same in every city. It was quite startling, actually, to encounter these singers and find yourself with them on their own stage, in their own terms, but they with you, having to deal with you directly too. At the end of the High Line is the Hudson Yards Redevelopment District. You might have heard about this. It's considered New York's sort of most expensive and most extravagant development ever made. It is at the very northern end of the High Line, the Hook, and goes between 30th Street and 34th Street. And we were responding many years ago, in 2008, I believe, we responded to a request from the city of New York to think about a new culture facility for New York City. The site, which is wholly owned by the city of New York and is actually only surrounded by the Hudson Yards, was to be atop a very elaborate bridge structure over the rail yards in West Manhattan. And we responded to an RFP, which asked the question, what is the future of culture in New York City? And what would a facility to engage the future of culture look like? And we started by asking ourselves the question, with over 1,200 cultural institutions in New York City, why should there be one more? We thought that perhaps the question that came from the city was flawed in its very nature. But then we started thinking about the culture institutions that are here, many of them, some of the most loved arts and music presenters in the entire world, but realizing that they were limited in what they could do, not only in terms of scale, but also in terms of discipline. So we actually imagined that there could be a new kind of facility that would be multidisciplinary from its outset, that would think about how to accommodate visual arts, performing arts, film, and all other kinds of art within the same structure, even simultaneously. We also realized that there was not a building that could be transformed to accommodate these different disciplines or accommodate different scales of work. And we thought that was a thrilling opportunity. Scalable is what I said before, that we wanted to make a building that has multiple options for showing many different kinds of culture elements. And lastly, unbranded. All of the other cultural institutions have a known brand, and they are founded by a board whose interests lie in a particular place. With this new institution, we imagined that we could grow a brand new institution from the ground up with the precise identity of not knowing what they're presenting. And so making a building for the unknowable is actually what this project is. We were inspired by Cedric Price's Fun Palace, and not an uncompleted building that was proposed for London many, many years ago in the 60s. And in that project, the inhabitants of the building, the visitors, and the people putting on cultural events could alter the makeup of the building, the way the space was actually made to fit their needs on the spot. And we believe that that's a project, a modernist project, that has never actually been achieved fully. And we thought that we could play into that ambition and make it realizable for the 21st century. To start to do that, we imagine this building as two buildings in one: a fixed building with very simple floor plates that make four very simple loft-like spaces that could be subdivided and used for many different kinds of things. And surrounding that, a grid shell structure on wheels that could move. It could cover that fixed building or roll out to a portion of adjacent public space to then operate as a spectacular place of presentation, unmatched by any in the city. The way we would be able to do that was by utilizing extant technologies that you find in shipyards. A gantry crane, very simple example of that. A very heavy object that can lift many things on sets of wheels that can move very, very easily in and out across a large surface. And the other thing that we had imagined is that by making this building a transformable building and making each floor operate independently from the other floors, and the shed portion operate independently, it could accommodate various kinds of programs, from for-profit programming to nonprofit programming to different kinds of disciplines under one roof. And so we imagined that one of the ways that this institution would cover the cost of operation would be built into the infrastructural nature of the architecture from the very beginning. And a few slides showing the shed in design phase. The shed itself is a steel lattice structure that's covered in inflated ETFE pillows. The main building is simply a steel and concrete building surrounded by a glass wall, with the floors in the main fixed building are all subdividable. They have infrastructures that let them take walls and take sound equipment and various other things that let them be transformed as well as the shed space itself. And just a view from the other side to show how spectacular it is when the shed grid shell rolls out into the public park, changing the nature of that public park and suggesting the kind of spectacle that's going on the inside. Just a couple of videos showing the unveiling of the structure and its first roll 3 years ago, I guess, when we were midway through construction. Terribly exciting moment. I'm going to just show a few minutes of this video. Here you see the High Line suggested in operation, and then later surrounding the deck covering Hudson Yards. The shed occupies a spot right on the edge of the High Line, and thus in a way is the institutional anchor of the north end of the line, very much the way the Whitney Museum is the anchor of the south end of the line. The fixed building is covered with a 125-foot cube of steel lattice. That is about 40 meter cube. And when it rolls out into the public space, the side walls of the shed can roll up and allow the shed to operate as an indoor-outdoor pavilion, allow the shed to take delivery of goods and art right onto its main floor surface. The shed structure itself is complete with a technical grid on the top that allows the entire building to operate like a fly tower in an opera house. But rather than having the performance space dedicated in one location, which a fly tower and opera house would do, the fly tower here covers the entire expanse of the shed proper, allowing the entire place to be made as a piece of theater, but also concurrently have an entire audience sitting underneath it. This is a brand new typology in the field of performance spaces, or in the realm of performance spaces that we know of. There is a technical lighting grid. There are blackout shades, very huge blackout shades that can make the room entirely dark. There are acoustical banners that make the room sound for projected volumes for amplified performances. The adjacent floors can open up into the main shed space, doubling the floor size of the primary room. It becomes 3,200 meters square of exhibition space, co-joined exhibition space. I'm gonna just roll off of that, and so we can finish the talk. Here it is on the day of the first roll, and then as a finished building. We opened in April of 2019, merely 8 months before the pandemic hit. So they were really not even able to get through a full season of programming before they had to shut down and reimagine themselves from a position of reimagining themselves in the beginning. However, it is now fully open. The Frieze Art Fair is just opening today in the shed. It's a test to exactly, or it's an example of exactly how we thought the shed might operate, which is as a space for both commercial and nonprofit cultural engagement. It's also a space that is showing work that's been developed specifically for the shed. That is a new development since the director came on board. Here, a combination of visual art and performing art piece. This was done in the first season, and the paintings change before your eyes, the same as the music, which was composed for that exact event. And looking into the shed proper, you can see that it's quite a spectacular space with lots of technical equipment built in that can all be changed and rearranged according to what event will happen in there. And then some of the first shows, Soundtrack of America was the first show that happened there with about 1,400 people in attendance on a flat floor of the main shed space, and also watching from the second level, which in effect is a balcony overlooking the shed space. The glass walls open completely to allow the two spaces to be co-joined. And here is a demonstration from one of the opening season productions of how the audience and the performer share the space. Back of house and front of house are completely overlaid, which is something that doesn't happen in a conventional performance space. Most importantly, we were interested in the civic nature of this building, of the shed. And one of the programs that has been instituted is called Open Call, where local artists are asked to submit projects, and a number of them are chosen to be shown every year. In the first year that this happened, the shed structure was pulled back to reveal the open plaza area, and a lot of these presentations took place in the open plaza area. This is actually in the pandemic. You can see how aerated the shed is, and how it has allowed for an early opening while other institutions have been closed. And here it is operating as a kind of civic space with food trucks rolling right into the main shed floor, and people just walking in straight off of the High Line into this space. I'm going to move into two projects that are outside of New York City now, one a park and one a performance center. Closer to you guys, Zaryadye Park is in Moscow, directly across the street from the Kremlin, and taking the place of the old Hotel Rossiya, which was a 3,000 something room hotel in the heart of Moscow, built by various premiers, including Stalin, and was taken down to make way for a public park. We participated in the competition knowing that what was going to replace that hotel was going to be something given over to the public. And so we were very interested in the democratization of that space through landscape and open institutional buildings. The idea that we had that won the competition was to bring the native landscapes of Russia right to the park, to inhabit Red Square along with St. Basil's Cathedral and the Kremlin, to make a kind of wild urbanism, to bring wildness to the center of Moscow in a way, the way that we tried to do that with the High Line. And unlike any other urban parks in Moscow, which are very, very cultivated and described. So we took the tundra, the forest, the wetland, and the steppe, and brought those elements into the center of the park, arrayed sectionally from highest to lowest as they would be found in nature, and overlapping each other to provide sectional places where we could locate buildings and new culture institutions which were prescribed in the program. By putting these buildings inside the landscape, we were able to keep the surface of the park almost 100% occupiable for the public and for green. We worked with Hargraves Jones Associates out of New York and San Francisco to develop a planting plan that was ecologically sound for Moscow that would also be really wonderful year round, just like it was at the High Line. But we also wanted this park to do something different, which is to first off address the issue of climate change through a series of operations that would make its comfort level passively more enjoyable year round. So Moscow, which is a cold city, would appreciate warmth that would be given through various thermal storage devices and simply capturing the sun's heat during the winter months. So that the park addressed our climate crisis, but also addressed creature comfort at the same time. The idea behind the capturing of the solar radiation happens on top of the grid, on top of the Philharmonic Hall. So there's a structure underneath the park surface, and then above that is a glass grid shell which captures the sun's heat. Even during winter months, it remains a comfortable place to be, and it also has no wind. And so we were interested to make this park be inhabited year round. We were also interested in making this park be habitable all over. There are no gates or fences around the park. The paving pattern allows people to meander in unscripted ways and to find their way into the center of planted areas or into a thicket of trees where they're hidden from view and can't see the city. This was our competition entry, the design that we submitted and quite remarkably won as the American firm, the one American competitor in that competition. And then this is the park upon its opening in 2018 or 2017. I believe it's been around for 3.5 years. We were quite impressed by our Russian partners' ability to make the park. They rolled up their sleeves and figured out how to do it. Some of the vistas that you get are very much like what we had anticipated, with birch forests that bleed right into Red Square, hills that are built over pieces of architecture feeling like natural landscape, and the ability to escape, to get off of a paved path into a piece of planted area. The pavilions that are buried inside the landscape are quite high-tech and very architecturally significant, and offer ways for Muscovites and visitors to experience the history of the city and an ecological exhibition about nature in Russia, as well as restaurants and markets. The grid shell that covers this big hill that is also covering the Philharmonic Hall is occupiable as a grandstand and informal performance space. And what happens underneath the grid shell is that grass is allowed to grow year round, and the creature and the comfort is there for everyone all year round. You can see how the amphitheater creeps up into that space and on top of the Philharmonic Hall, and allows people to look back at Moscow, to see the city anew after having been lost in the park, getting to this hill. And here's the first winter when it was open, with snow outside and green grass on the inside. Probably the most prominent feature of the landscape is a new Moscow River overlook, 75-meter cantilever in cast-in-place concrete. As Americans, we designed this in steel. We had no idea that you could make a 75-meter cantilever in concrete, but they figured out how to do it, and it has become one of Moscow's newest landmarks and icons. But we're not happy just to make an icon. What we want to make is a new kind of experience, and here we wanted to bring people to a vantage point that they had never been able to have in Moscow, and that is suspended over the river with beautiful vistas back to Moscow's monuments. Needless to say, this has become a selfie center in the city. And the park has taken on a life of its own. It attracts more than 10 million visitors per year already, which is more than the High Line attracts these days. And It's also sported large gatherings from the World Cup on, and has been featured as one of the world's greatest places in 2018. And almost most significantly is that the way the park has been, taken over by people who use it, especially young lovers who flock there for wedding portraits or to just get away from their families, or to have a tryst in nature. And I think that one of the exciting things about making a park is when it becomes, when it's taken over by people to do their most intimate things in, you know that you've made something really special. And here is the leader looking at the model on opening day. That's all I'll say about that. And then, we know you've made it when you make it onto a postage stamp. The last project I'm going to talk about very briefly, just for like 5-7 minutes, is our most recent building to be open. And it's open during the pandemic. It was very difficult to oversee its final year of construction, but somehow we managed to do it digitally. It's a new campus for the Juilliard School, which is based in New York and has never had a campus outside of New York City. It's in the Binhai district of Tianjin, which, if you don't know where that is, it's an hour and a half outside of Beijing on high-speed rail. So it's in the Beijing metro area, but Tianjin itself is the fourth largest city in China at 14 million people. And Tianjin was a city that had been occupied and has prefectures that are colonial in nature. So it's kind of used to having Western architects come in and do bits of work. Binhai is no different. The master plan was designed by SOM from New York, based on the grid of Manhattan in the crook of the High River, so kind of resembling the island of Manhattan. The idea was that this district, unlike many in China, many new towns in China, would be entirely walkable and would be a live, work, play district, a complete town in and of itself. Sprinkled in the green districts around this new downtown would be a set of culture facilities, first and foremost, including the Juilliard campus, which sits in a park on the edge of the river. So as a starting point to this project, which is around 350,000 square feet, there were three public performance spaces that range in size from 800 to 250, and a whole bunch of other spaces that could be used for rehearsal and performance. Our first idea was to sync the performance spaces so that their stages would all occupy a lower level, allowing the backstage spaces to connect underground and freeing up the ground floor to be dedicated to the public realm, to carry the park through and make a porous ground floor with doors on all sides. So the three main performance pieces are a concert hall, a black box, and a recital hall. There were other large-scale rehearsal spaces that occupied the other corners, and then admin and staff spaces on top of that. But the most important aspect of the design is that these public spaces that feel like pavilions sitting in a park allow for passage between them. They've also the edges lift up to allow for views and light into them from the outside. And they allow for access for the public and students via cutouts on the sides of them, to a series of bridges containing all the education spaces, teaching studios, practice rooms, and classrooms. So all of the education components that are happening above an open lobby. All of those bridges are clad in glass walls, floor to ceiling, curtain wall systems, allowing each and every room light and views down to the lobby and out to the park. The idea was that the park simply continues through the building, and that the public is welcome to occupy the building whenever it wants to, whether they're going to a ticketed concert or not. This is the project under construction. It was quite large, built in steel. You can see some of the structural bold moves without columns underneath any of the bridges, using trusses that cross the entire site to hold up the bridges on the two ends. It's quite dramatic in nature. And here's the building as it's been completed. It opened in November. And you can see the bridges spanning between the pavilions that hold the performance spaces. In this view, you can see the Ujaipu Center City, which is a commercial district. It includes hotels, condos, office buildings, restaurants, and other cultural institutions that will be built in the future. And just a few views of the exterior of the building, showing how it sits in a very generous public park. And the idea is that that park simply continues into the building through a series of planted groves that take natural light from the skylights that exist between the bars. You can see here how the outside glass becomes the inside glazing to crosswalks, teaching studios, and practice rooms. And this is a view of the lobby with the 5 bridges crossing over it and the 4 performance pavilions, each with a front door facing into this public realm. And just a little bit about the basement. The delivery happens here, the loading dock happens here, and all of these performance spaces are connected behind the scenes and still allowing the public to occupy the very center of this donut plan. And moving up through the building, I don't have to go into great detail, but the bridges that span the pavilions each have student lounges on the end. So even the students are given wonderful spaces to meet informally and to mingle. And each of those has wonderful views out to the surrounding district. The concert hall is an 800-seat hall, surround hall. It can be reconfigured. It has a slot window to the outside that allows people to look in and also allows the room to have natural light during rehearsals. We worked with Jaffe Holden Acoustics on this project. And although we have not visited since it opened during the middle of COVID, we are told by people who have experienced it that it has the best acoustics in China, which is very exciting to hear, since that is first and foremost what this building needed to do, was to provide the proper acoustical environment for education and performance to happen. So each of the performance spaces is a box-in-box construction. The concert hall sits on a set of these heavy-duty shock absorbers that allows the concert hall to not touch any of the outside structure, and also takes the vibration that might be found when you have an earthquake. We worked with Jaffe Holden and local manufacturers to invent a new kind of curtain wall that we used that would allow practice rooms to be both independently structured, but also joined through a continuous glass facade. And there is no sound bleed between those rooms, we understand. We tested the acoustics in a very large scale model and also with live participants sitting in chairs to make sure that the building would perform like we wanted it to. And just a few images. The building transforms from day to night in a more theatrical way, making those people visiting for concerts have a sense of spectacle and excitement. Here are the practice rooms with people in them, and great visual connection to the lobby down below. Hallways that all are light-filled, as opposed to the hallways in the Juilliard School here in New York, which are dark and have dead ends. And then the student lounges at the ends of the bars are all beautiful spaces to hang out and to chill out. The rehearsal space in the top of the concert pavilion is also an event space with a beautiful picture window to the high river. And there's also a library that will have scores and books and some more images of the outside. There's a reflecting pool around one corner that makes a beautiful impression. I think that I'll just play this this video and that'll be it, and we can take Q&A. This is actually a concert that took place in the Symphony Hall, the Orchestra Hall, in late last year, I guess, in November. There are lots of elements that we brought from the Juilliard campus here in New York, which we also renovated. We like to think that both campuses share DNA. This is not a franchise. It's actually the Juilliard School with the same faculty and students that spend time both places. So it is literally, in a way, part of New York in China. And there are correct figures on the seat counts in these rooms. The stage is completely reconfigurable. It can become a flat floor, and it can also host a chorus up above the stage in the wraparound seating. One special space is the Juilliard Imagination, and this is a high-tech, digitally connected space that allows the New York campus to have a live feed to the Tianjin campus, and also show rebroadcast former Juilliard concerts, but also concerts from anywhere around the world. It's a way to introduce the Chinese public to classical music and to Juilliard's program. We really think of this building as a tool both to educate the students here, but also to educate the general public, to welcome them in and let them see behind the scenes of education and get them interested in classical music and the Juilliard program. With that, I'm going to hit escape and we can go back and have a Q&A session for a few minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much for your lecture. Those projects were amazing. I want to ask you about the last project. Just a quick question. How it's connected to the mass transport system? It looks like it's served only by roads. Is there some metro line or something like that?
Glad you asked that. So China has been building lots of high-speed rail connections, and indeed there's a new rail line that comes directly from Beijing to that very site, merely 300 meters away, is a train station that gets you to Beijing in an hour and 20 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. So I will jump back to Highline. You mentioned that there was some interesting response from the community around the railway, that they wanted to turn it down. And I want to ask you about the actual community around the Highline. Is there something like strong community of people who are living there, living around the Highline, who accepted the Highline as a part of their lives?
Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion about gentrification in general and in projects like this, but also in particular around the Highline, because the Highline does cut through two New York City housing projects, and there was a lot of community buy-in for the design, but I don't think there was a lot of community engagement from an early stage. And the unfortunate effect was that as property values rose, partly due to the line's success, it forced a lot of the businesses that these lower income communities depended on for their day-to-day living, and caused a kind of tension in the neighborhood. Since then, there's been a lot of learning, and the founder of the Friends, co-founder of the Friends of the High Line, Robert Hammond, he left the High Line for a while and thought about what to do, and came back and initiated a whole host of programs that engaged that community, both for to give them jobs, but also to teach them skills related to parks and maintenance and tourism and all kinds of things. And I think it's something that we think about now more often when we start redevelopment projects such as these in advance. It's definitely a lesson learned about that neighborhood problem.
Thank you. Another thing about the High Line, I would ask you about the involvement of landscape architects, because I think it's something like a laboratory for landscape architects. There's a lot of green, a lot of trees, a lot of flowers. Do you use it, I mean, in a way that you show the examples of how to work with the green infrastructure in cities?
We work with different landscape architects in all of these different locations. And in every instance, we're thinking about the broader scale design of cities and the way that these projects fit into a larger scale plan. And that may or may not include planting, but it definitely includes, access, transport, servicing, making sure that these parks contribute to kind of a network, let's say, of green spaces. Most cities are interested in their parks not being islands, but rather being connected to many, many green spaces that allow occupation of the city to occur throughout without leaving a green space. And so those kinds of considerations are definitely being taken into account. We're also very interested in water management, water retainage. A lot of these projects are helping the urban water problem by not allowing for runoff to get into the sewer systems. So, there's lots of systems to be considered. And some of the projects, the best projects, are taking them all into account. And our newer projects, I'd say, are trying to do that more and more. Including, the proper species to be using to be drought tolerant or to resist global warming or things like that. Mm-hmm. There is a lot of experimentation happening in the landscape world.
You are using a term, performance parks, which is, I think it's a really nice term for, venues like this one is. And I would like to ask you if you estimated this performance, estimated this success of the park. We, time to time, use these successful buildings, successful places are victims of their success. Does the park do what it needs, even if it's that successful?
Ultimately, we feel that these kinds of projects will self-regulate. I think the High Line has been, there's a lot of talk about how there are too many people there, over 7 million a year, and how it's hard to walk. Ultimately, crowds will self-regulate and make a more natural feeling condition. And so fewer people will go just by nature because it will be uncomfortable to go there. Clearly, the park has been very, very successful. It's I think, the most touristed destination in New York City at this moment, especially during COVID, where people could go there, and not worry about, contracting the disease. But even before this pandemic, it had already made its way into this sort of psychology of the city, showing up on all of the tourist maps and things like that. And we're really happy with that. But as you suggest, with success can come overexposure and overuse, and crowding in parts of the city that aren't prepared for that. those kinds of things. And while it's important for us to think about those things in advance of making a project, we can never actually hope to cover everything. There will always be something that happens that we could not prepare for.
Thank you. Last question. I would like to ask you about the dialogue or trialogue of Highline, the shed, and the vessel, because these three objects are new together. I would like to ask you if you are surprised by how they work together, if there is something that surprised you.
Well, I'm not sure that they were considered together, nor do I know that they all three work together. I do think we were considering our location on the High Line when we thought to make a building that moves on rails parallel to the rails of the High Line and also over the rail yard, sort of recalling the history of that site, but also literally using elements that could be found on the site. So we do think that our shed is responding to its location quite well. We had nothing to do with the vessel, its design, nor its conception, and I don't think that wouldn't have been our solution to that crowded environment in the middle of Hudson Yards. We understand it is also becoming its own tourist destination, and which is great. One of the things that's wonderful about New York City and a lot of American cities is there's an unplanned accidentalness about a lot of them. And, some of their most endearing moments happen when certain things rub up against other things and make a kind of unexpected collision. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing if they weren't planned together or seem to even work together in a good way.
Okay, thank you very much for your answers. Thank you very much for your lecture and for deciding to spend the time with us. Thank you again, and I hope we will meet in Prague in person.
Absolutely. Look forward to it. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Thank you. You've been watching Urban Talks with Charles Renfro. You will find recorded video on YouTube and Facebook. Have a good time.